Yeah, under the old one, so.
Yeah, we make that trip, couple times a month and, yeah, I don't like that K-10 route.
No, it's,
From,
We are.
Iowa to,
oh, we're live.
Big. With that road, that was awful.
Cameras.
How many times I had almost close to cutting your head off. That was nice. They've done a lot of nice work there.
Here, I'll smile, I'll let my friend. Is the camera on?
Yeah. Jazz hands.
That's right.
I'm ready for a break.
I'm gonna post.
Let me see if I can post that post.
I don't know if I am on the members one.
Okay.
I'm gonna post in the,
Just the NEA to be good.
yeah.
I'll see if I can do the member form.
I know. We will give her some attention. Yeah, purchasing and payroll, everything, right?
Yeah, because, she was from.
Okay.
And let me create myself a sticky note here. And we will get, yeah, we will.
I gotta remember everything.
Oh, the new secretary?
This is one of the cases Carlos had done at the beginning of the year, just changing dates.
Tracy says school dues are their terms, payroll, cameras.
Yes, I can work on. Okay.
I can't do school duty or cameras, but I can do Blue Bear, terms,
Yes.
payroll,
Yeah, that was already something I have to run.
those things.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have that with Do you have that with you?
School dude, though, I think Jana Dreyer knows.
I might be able to find it, but it'll take me a while.
I'll send you this
Send
list.
me the list of things. And
I'm gonna tell her to reach out to the campus police for the campus.
we can get Jan over there to help her with a lot of that. Hey, Richard, when we think about, we only do negotiations on the years that we have the Winter Olympics.
The Winter Olympics?
Yeah, we only do it
Is
on
that
years
so that you
that.
don't, is that so that you don't miss the Olympics
So
during
I don't miss
the
the
summer?
Summer Olympics, but we only do it on the years that we have Winter Olympics. And we get done what we gotta get done on the years we have Winter Olympics. What do you think?
I think that sounds like a reasonable, because I wouldn't want to be here negotiating while the Summer Olympics is going on.
No, I took your interest at heart, and I agree.
There you go.
I could miss downhill skiing, but I don't wanna miss the 100-yard dash.
Do they still have the 100-yard
Or
dash?
100 meter, they don't have 100-yard anything, do they? 100 meters. Or the alpine, and I'm sure it takes a tremendous amount of skill to shoot, cross-country ski for 8 hours and then.
I was gonna say, Gary, if they had the 100-yard dash still at the Olympics, I should sign up.
That's only on field day that we do 100 yards.
And the three-legged race?
Yeah, the 3-legged race. So anyway, that's something to roll around.
Okay. We have 3 proposals that came from NEA that are non-economic, that were passed to us back on July 10th for us to consider having a conversation around. The first one is Article 20. And the note that we have is that the contract language currently allows for 3 days notification for an employee. The association feels that 3 days is not enough time for the employee or the administration. We are proposing an additional 2 days, which basically means that the new language would say when the supervisory administrator deems it necessary to implement disciplinary action in the form of a written reprimand, probation renewal or non-renewal, resulting from a violation of the professional agreement by a professional employee. The supervising administrator will notify the professional employee in writing. The written notice will inform the professional employee of his or her right to an association representative or any bargaining unit representative of his or her choice at said meeting and shall include the topics to be discussed. The meeting must take place within This is where the change was. The existing language says 3 school days. The proposed change is to make that 5 school days. Within 5 school days of written notice. The supervising administrator and the professional employee shall attempt to schedule the meeting at a mutually agreed upon time. Should the parties fail to agree upon a time, the meeting will be held on the 5th school day following written notice at a time established by the supervisor and administrator. Then you put up a second. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us concerning the rationale behind the requested change in language?
I don't think so. In this case, of course, we handed you our rationale that 3 days notification does not seem to be enough time, as you mentioned, for employee administration. And we're proposing for an additional 2 days. I think that, well, of course, we did mention in the rationale of the current COVID pandemic, of course, makes everything move slower than it has before. So I don't know that we have any additional rationale to hand or to give at this time.
Just out of curiosity, have there been issues with this previously? Timeframe?
We had some issues with just being one president, and the opportunity arises when the president has to go multiple places. Then a lot of times the president would rely upon our current Uniserv director, Cheyenne Shively, and she would make the attempt to get the ones that, the 2 of them were scheduled at the same time in 2 separate buildings. The intent is if there's 5 days, then the president would maybe have more availability to attend to these meetings and not rely so much on NEA to help pick up the slack because of the shortened time frame of 3 days. So there was an issue in prior COVID where NEA Topeka was having to rely upon NEA to help meet the demand if there was, at certain times when there was a lot going on. I mean, the preference would be 7 days. I mean, to allow enough time for the president to be able to do those things, but we kind of came to a consensus of the team that's 5. And that is kind of the reasoning behind why we decided to ask for an extension so that the president could attend to these issues and not rely upon KNEA as we had, or as much.
Well, that explanation is helpful. Well, the president wants to be available to attend all of these meetings, if at all possible.
Yes, sir.
Well, I can tell you the proposed language change isn't anything that we have issue with. The second proposal is Article 28, has to do with professional and employees protections. And you stated that is your purpose to discuss and clarify current language to ensure a safe working and learning environment. This has to do with Article 28, Section H. And in this section that has historically and currently referred to costs of medical and surgical and hospital services. It's also it's Section H and also Section I, where you are wanting to insert mental. Can you give us the rationale behind
This was brought to the attention, of course, of NEAT and this committee when earlier this year, if you'll recall, there were several instances involving Topeka Public Schools, some which even ended up in the media, where bullying incidents had happened in schools, and there were people in the community that felt maybe that Topeka Public Schools wasn't doing enough, and we had some negative public relations out there concerning that, which brought to light a number of different issues within the district where there have been circumstances where within the classroom, the adults in the room, whether they're paraeducators or educators, felt threatened or concerned about their own safety from students in the classroom and in some cases parents of the students in the classroom. And so we read through the language of the contract pretty carefully in multiple places. And we can clearly see, and you can see it here in the language itself, that medical, surgical, and hospital services are already included in the language. But based on the mental health issues that can arise out of whether it's staff members or other students in the room being bullied in the classroom, the contract, of course, covers the staff members. But that perhaps we should insert that piece or that particular word into the contract itself so that mental health services as needed could be provided. We just wanted it to be explicitly explained. And then we end up where we are now, where I think we may have some more mental health issues that we're dealing with this year on the part of staff, just because the environment we're going to be going into this year. I'm certain that your team has heard a lot, and we've heard a lot of uncertainties, teachers being concerned. We do have many staff members that are willing to come into the classroom and willing to teach, but their mental health is a concern of NEAT. So initially, our concern was based on the issues that came up in the 1920 school year. And it has been exacerbated, I would say, by the recent developments in our community and the concerns we have going forward related to COVID in the schools or instances of that. So we thought that the word mental probably needed to be included in the language to stress that that support would be there for staff members as well.
Well, we certainly understand your comments around COVID. But when this proposal was originally communicated to us through the interest letters that were exchanged back on March the 31st, I don't know that anyone had any idea that we would be in the environment that we're in now. So when you were suggesting that men will be inserted here in Article 28, that had to be related to situations that had already previously occurred.
Yes.
So can you give us any examples, specific examples that would support this? Because I have to tell you, when it comes to the middle piece, it is very subjective. And we find it difficult for someone to actually identify and prove that any issues that they may be experiencing around their own personal mental health, how you could say in every case that that is related to their work and school activity. So do we have any specific examples? You mentioned bullying, you're familiar with some of the situations that ended up in the media, but all of those were student related. They weren't staff related. And, you know, there's always the question too, you know, as you look at individual situations, you know, just whether or not bullying occurred. You know, some of the more highly publicized situations, we know that there was some of that activity taking place because it was even captured on video. But when it comes to staff, this is highly subjective, and what you're asking is for the district to assume financial responsibility for something that may not have even occurred, you know, on school property or during the course of the school day.
What I was gonna say was, I don't have any specific examples in my head. I cannot think of any off the top of my head that I specifically have knowledge of, other than a circumstance of my own, which is 20+ years ago. And so I won't take us back that far in time. But I do think I have some members of the team who can give anecdotal evidence, sounds like what you're asking for, of specific incidences of situations in which bullying led to mental health issues.
On my occasion, on things that have happened with me, I would say that the one time that I was affected mentally was when I had several objects thrown at me by a boy. Called for help from the principal. By the time I got someone down there, I had to clear the classroom as he threw all my chairs on top of my desk and was throwing Chromebooks. And I was trying to get another teacher to help me stop him. And I'm not saying that I felt like I was in danger, which kind of was, but I'm kind of a tough little broad. But he obviously had many mental problems, and he kind of broke down after that, and things were happening in his household that I wasn't prepared to handle. I can also tell you another situation where we had a young man who, it was an everyday thing with him to say inappropriate things and do inappropriate things. And by the end of, I believe it was February, he had not returned to school for several days, and a coworker of mine had found out that he was responsible for laying on, and they don't know whether he did it on purpose or not, but killing the baby in the family. And that upset her greatly, to talk to someone about how could this happen. We also have had 2 incidents of knives. You know, I had a child that had a knife, talked him down, de-escalated, took him down to the office. But I think the mental part was the reason why he was carrying the knife. And it was because he was terrified of the father, he was terrified of the neighborhood. And when you are also things with parents get very frustrated at you, and they do threaten you, and they do, you know, it's out of anger for them, but they're not sure why they say it, but they do. When all those things, and it can't be just, you know, it's not just one situation. Sometimes it's several situations together to understand the dynamic of the children and the trauma that they have. And sometimes to be able to understand that, you do need some mental health. We have been trauma informed. We have been told, we've gone through that training, but sometimes it can be so encompassing. And then it can affect you, you know, why am I doing this for my children when all of these things happen? And I have to say the last incident was a child that I had a 1.5 years ago. She was murdered. Her mother was murdered. I don't know why. Nothing has been on TV about it. I did go to her wake. She was a young lady that the mother was at school quite a bit, so I did know her mother. I knew there were some drugs involved in the family, didn't know the whole detail. Her mom would come in to where I worked my second job, and I had her come and help me with an after-school program because her mom said she's kind of going down the wrong path, and I said, bring her back to me, let's work with her. And then I find out this summer that she's been murdered and her mother has been murdered. And that greatly affected me. It still does. You know, I have no answers. I don't know why this happened. I don't, you know, it does get to you when you develop those relationships with those children, and which we are encouraged to do and which we should do. And these families get to know you and you get to know the families, and they see you outside of work and they talk to you and they trust you, and you're murdered or something happens. I've had many students of mine that, I think this is my fourth child that has been murdered. I've had 3 suicides with children I've had, and many that are in jail right now for first-degree murder. And after a while, that's upsetting. That affects my mental health. And yes, I have used the program that we have, where we can call a counselor and talk to a counselor, but often that goes beyond 5 days. And I think, I'm not gonna say I'm that hardened, but I think as years have gone by and I've worked with the children I have, the children that have been they have trauma in their lives, I've learned, I think I've learned until just recently where this young girl was murdered, but for first, second, third, fourth year teachers, it's trauma. And it's personal trauma. Because you have made these children your own, and you have got to know them, and you have relationships with them. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And those are the kind of things that, when we're talking about mental health. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I would. I'm deeply appreciative of the trauma-based care and training that Topeka Public Schools has provided us in the past. That was incredibly helpful and meaningful and necessary. Since that time, there has been a great deal of enlightenment about adults providing education and services for children who are traumatized and secondary trauma that is based upon serving and meeting those needs. And I do know that there are frequent conversations among staff about how do you stay sane in a crazy world? How do you maintain professional, compassionate, educational care? Because we all of us, it doesn't matter where we all agree that children matter, their future matters, and that we want to do our absolute best to give them everything we can for them to be successful. And so I'm appreciative of Topeka Public Schools acknowledging that, recognizing that, supporting training for that. But I also know there are a great many conversations I hear among staff who are taking medications themselves so they can get up and get out of bed and get to school every day and keep functioning. And that the higher the stressors, the higher the levels of those medications, which is a physical, medical consideration, but also the burnout mentally of, we were talking earlier about needing to do our best to keep rookie teachers and to maintain our profession of education and the best professionals that we can train and mentor. And I think the sustainability of that is based on recognizing that in a school district like TPS, burnout and mental health care and stresses are real not only for the constituents we serve, but also for the staff.
I'd like to add, we have, as I've taught school, and I've taught school for 28 years in a lower socioeconomic environment, the trauma and the situations that these children are in and the things that have occurred in their families, it's only increased. And I appreciate Topeka Public Schools for recognizing that these kids have trauma and they have to be treated a certain way. And I understand that, and I take the extra time at the beginning of the day or the end of the day or on the weekends, anything I can to help these children. But it does weigh on you mentally.
Thank you. You know, as I listen to comments from both you ladies, it certainly does validate the importance of Topeka Public Schools continuing to maintain a program that we've had in existence for a number of years, and that's our EAP program. It is designed to address situations like you are referring to and like you have lived in some cases. When we look at the information that is compiled by our EAP provider, and we look at what has happened over the last couple of years around mental health, we have certainly had people take advantage, okay, of those services. But very few have made reference to the reasons for them being there being something that is work-related. We have had many refer to problems around stress and depression, anxiety. But you know, they even categorize it, and evidently the question is asked, you know, whether or not it is work-related or not. And in the last couple of years, there's only been 4 in the last couple of years that have cited their issues being related to work. You know, there are many stressors associated with daily life. You know, in some cases, problems within a marriage can cause stress, depression, family situations, you know, grief and bereavement can cause those stressors. There's many things that can cause those stressors that are separate and distinct from duties associated with performing your job with Topeka Public Schools. That's why we would hate to be in a situation where those other factors that come into play could be grouped under a, as this language would indicate, workers' compensation situation. Because as I said to begin with, you know, many times it's pretty subjective. It's different when it comes to physical injury, because many times, you know, you can see the results of an accident. You see the results of a physical injury. And many times there may be a witness to what occurred. You know, someone tripped and fell or whatever. It's not as easy to identify and to trace the, what caused mental anguish. That's why we have a problem, incorporating that term and that wording in this language that currently is in Article 28. We do have always available for anyone the EAP services. And really, we wish that more people would take advantage of that. Something that was very, enlightening for me as I examined some of the data. And when I talk about the data, we're just talking about numbers. Okay, I don't have anyone's name or personal information or anything like that. It seems like there is a real uptick fourth quarter, because the data is divided into quarters. But as I said, very little that is associated with work. One of the items that was listed, had to do with something that we all know is out there, but we certainly hope that it is limited within the field of education, and that's substance abuse. So I would have to say that as much as we want to keep supporting staff, and we want to provide the services to help address not only physical situations that occur, but also mental. We feel that we do that by providing the EAP program. And we would be certainly not supportive of incorporating mental in addition to the other items that are listed in Article 28, Section H and I.
I'm going to ask a question that's kind of related to this, but also veers off into the future that we're looking at. I can say that everybody in this room is very worried about the children when they come back, especially some of the children in the environments like Jermaine was describing there. So I would like to say we all need to be aware that we're going to have some children coming back to us because they've been home since March 7th, traumatized by the environment that they lived in, knowing that we were their safe haven every day and we disappeared for that last 9 weeks and then had a long summer. So when we mention trauma-informed care and the support that the PAC program provides, we need to be aware that those programs and those supports might be very seriously strained this year by, I don't know, what shape our babies come back in. That's what they are. We're worried.
You understand? From what we hear, it's one of the reasons why there are many people that are so interested in school reopening. So the kids can get back to what used to be a normal way of life, as far as what happened during this time of the year for them. And knowing that not only from the standpoint of personal safety and security, but also from the standpoint of having basic needs met, it's helpful for them to be in a steady, consistent school environment, as much as possible. You understand that? Any other questions? This would be one that we would decline to change the language on.
And I hear what you're saying about that. I would also ask, is there any point in these discussions that we're having where we can talk about some of the other concerns that we have about COVID? There's certainly school safety issues. If not today, certainly when we meet again, but a chance to talk more about our concerns. There are a couple of people on our team, one who is not on this team, who are on the school COVID response teams. And those documents just got into our hands within the last couple of days. So we're beginning to see what each individual building is going to need to be doing in order to be responding to the temperature checks, the isolation rooms, the 6-foot distancing, the mask compliance. Even, I believe, we're going to become medical professionals within our classrooms if we hear too many coughs. So I would like, if not today, it is certainly a school safety issue, that we have a chance at this discussion to talk about what our role will be and what supports will be expected from staff members as we return back to the buildings.
You said that under normal circumstances. I mean, we're always willing to have discussions and talk and try to answer whatever questions you might have. I would say that based on what you are wanting to discuss, that it should not be something that is discussed and handled as part of these negotiations, because it wasn't anything that was cited. I certainly understand the interest and concern that NEA would have. So if we want to have those discussions outside of this venue, we are more than happy to engage in those type of discussions and try to address whatever questions and concerns that you have, but not as part of these negotiations.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate your offer to allow us to have some conversations. And I would definitely like to, I would say before these are all done, to actually iron out a time, maybe when NEAT, it might be me and Richard, it might be some other members, could sit down with admin and talk about, our concerns, because even if we listed, I gave you a list of our concerns last Friday, and as we speak, those change. So sometime between now and when we do return on September 1st, I would love for us to be able to have a sit down with perhaps members of your team over our COVID concerns. From our perspective, we understand completely what you guys are dealing with. I have said more than once this summer, I wouldn't want to be an admin as you're trying to figure out how to navigate this field. But we do want our teacher voice to be heard.
And we welcome those discussions.
Okay.
Be more than happy to
That's-
schedule that.
Sounds awesome. Thank you.
The last article is Article 31. And this is a proposed language change. This would be an additional appendix. And the reasoning and the purpose behind this proposed language, just to make sure that everyone is aware, says that it is our purpose to add language to clarify and address situations regarding placement for those individuals who receive additional master's hours and or simultaneously achieve multiple master's degrees as a result of the alternative teaching pathway. NEAT believes that as an association, there are no protections currently in place to represent the dual pathways process for teaching. you believe would be more of an issue in future years. And based on that reasoning, you propose the formation of a committee. I guess my question would be, what issues have developed relative to the alternative pathways that make you think that we need language to address this? Has there been problems with the existing language and how it's been applied?
Well, I think I would start off by saying, for teachers who become licensed through the alternative pathways, alternative teaching pathways, we're not 100% sure as an organization how they fall into the pay scale, if you will. So if somebody is, for example, one of the members brought up the fact that if someone has been in banking, and we had just such a teacher like that at Eisenhower a few years ago, so he had an MBA, master's degree in business, and was in banking for decades. And when he retired from banking, he came into the teaching profession and, through the alternative pathways program and became a math teacher. And so, was he paid for that business master's degree as well as like a first-year teacher? Or I think there's just some fuzziness there about how or where teachers who follow that alternative pathway fall on the salary schedule.
I think there's also been an issue with a teacher that was on alternative pathways, and I don't remember the circumstances around their situation, but at the end of the day, the decision was made that, well, they're not really a teacher because they were, I don't know, a doctor before and now they're teaching science. Like I said, I don't remember the particulars, but it was just the idea that this individual is recognized as a teacher, being paid on the teacher's salary, but it didn't seem as if things were, this person was treated differently, in part because they didn't have maybe the credentials that you would have gone through on the normal pathways, on the normal approach to be a teacher. They had done it differently. And so in the end, they were different, in part because they weren't at that time considered to be a teacher it wasn't that, they didn't have it wasn't because they didn't have the education, it was just because they were being treated in such a way to say they're different. So we thought, let's try to put together a committee without trying to put together formalized language. Let's just put together a committee that we could then analyze and study and try to figure out what it is we could do to help encourage people to take the alternate pathway that have that opportunity afforded to them if they decide. I don't know why a doctor would decide to stop practicing medicine, but they want to go teach chemistry. I don't know, but it didn't seem as if as a district and as an association that we're not really promoting this avenue for people to take, the alternate pathways to teaching. But we thought if we could work together collaboratively, the district and NEA Topeka, that maybe we could formulate something that would be then beneficial to not only the district, because then we'd have a teacher, but we would also have somebody in the buildings that would then be beneficial to not just students, but other colleagues as well. So having said all that, I just think it was a way we thought, let's put together something that we could study this together to then come up with a solution that we think is a problem, a solution to a problem we think is there, that way maybe we could benefit those individuals as well.
What makes you say that there is a problem? You talked about the teacher, Richard, that was treated differently. but I noticed you didn't use the term unfairly. You didn't say the teacher was treated unfairly. So being different doesn't mean that he was not treated fairly and placed where he should or she should have been on the salary schedule. Is that correct?
But no, it didn't have anything to do with the salary schedule. It was in this particular incident, I'm not wanting to express my opinion to say whether or not the person was treated unfairly or different. I just used the term differently because I don't know the situation behind it. But from what I understood from that situation, because that teacher was on the alternate pathways, the contract did not apply to them. They were different. And whether or not that was unfairly, I mean, I'd be, you know, for someone that was closer to the situation to be able to answer. But because that teacher was on the alternate pathways, this contract did not apply to that teacher. So from what I understood, let's try to figure out what we can do to solve so that everybody can be under the same contract. They're under the same salary schedule, but the language, the written language in the contract didn't apply to them.
When it came to what?
I can't answer that question. I can find out more information, but at the moment, I'm not recalling what that was.
And I wanted Michelle to address this. The alternative pathways teachers that I have come across were at Eisenhower Middle School. She teaches at Highland Park High School, where we have a number of, or have had a number of teachers come through that were alternative pathways teachers. So I don't want to say that they're necessarily teachers that are teaching at schools that have higher number of disadvantaged students, but I would like Michelle to address a little bit about it is difficult to retain those teachers because I don't think they're all getting the same message.
Yeah, I would say that from a traditional educational background, of course, we want to sustain the highest quality of trained professionals. We also know that years ago, when Kansas opened up a door for non-traditional pathways and not necessarily having to be licensed, that created an immediate need being filled for some districts that were struggling to fill positions. Well, since that time, there have been growing numbers of non-traditional students or non-traditional pathways to teaching in the classroom. And while NEAT wants to uphold the highest standards of all to meet our professional responsibilities, we also acknowledge that there's a growing number of professionals, and we don't cover that in this language in the contract, and we wanted to proactively prevent greater problems coming from that by having a joint committee where we're looking from both angles of the district filling those positions, which is a growing struggle, and also maintaining the highest standards of the profession. And how can we work together to ensure that? At our school, we see quite a turnover with those who are on alternative pathways. And, you know, we mentioned earlier with rookie teachers, first-year teachers, second-year teacher. Well, when there's a grown adult who's worked professionally and then is shifting from that professional occupation to a classroom, there's a great need to mentor that and facilitate that and to help sustain their success as well. And this is an area where the current contract doesn't really cover that growing body of teachers.
It doesn't cover them in what way?
You're asking, yeah, sorry, I just was pausing to think, you're asking for us to provide how they've been treated unfairly. And if this is our rule book to go by, and the rule book doesn't cover what's fair or unfair, that it's difficult to answer that question intelligently or adequately. And if we were able to work on making sure that fairness as well as the financial consistency, if that was more clear, we could answer that question better. And the fact that we can't, I'm not quite sure how to address the unfairness, other than it's unfair to our students when there's a teacher in place in August that leaves in September, and then another teacher in place in September that leaves in October or November, and the unfairness is to the students. And how can we remedy that better together?
But I think you would have to admit that, as unfortunate as that is, that even happens with true certified teachers that aren't coming to us on an alternative pathway, as far as leaving, prior to the end of their commitment, prior to the end of their contract. That happens. The reason why I keep pressing you on what is it that you're trying to accomplish is because when you talk about creating a separate appendix, you are doing so under a proposal that was presented to us under Article 31, which has to do with salaries. So I guess I keep coming back to what is it that is not appropriate, what hasn't been fair when it comes to salaries or compensation relative to alternative pathway instructors.
So I'm going to turn that back and ask a question of your team. When teachers are hired who have come through the alternative pathway program, I would assume that their preparation is the same as new teacher orientation. But what happens to them on the salary schedule in relation to their experience? Their experience is not going to be in education, but in relation to their educational pedigree, if you will. Is there a specific way in which the district decides these college hours would count towards movement on the, or placement on the salary schedule, and these won't? Is there a formal plan for that, or is it a case-by-case basis?
Well, everyone who's placed on a salary schedule is handled on a case-by-case basis, based on their degree.
Is there a situation where hours that they have, college hours that they have earned, would not count towards placement on the salary schedule?
Could do. And again, it could be that way with anyone, depending on what those hours are, what the situation is, and what the content area that they will be responsible for instructing.
I think I refer back to what I kind of said at the beginning. What we're hearing is still a little fuzzy, and I guess that's the whole thing, the whole intent behind this proposal is, I think as the years go by, we will be hiring more alternative pathways teachers rather than less. Teacher shortages are certainly a thing of the past, but also a very important part of our future. So what NEA is asking for is a sit down to discuss alternative pathways teachers and maybe a system or maybe language to make sure that they are protected as we are, and they are appropriately placed on the salary schedule.
But do we know now that what you're asking for is not being accomplished?
I think it's been a problem in some cases. We were able to give a couple of examples. I don't think it's an explosive problem at this point in time, but I think our concern is that it may become more of a problem down the road than it is now. Just trying to be proactive.
Am I missing something here? I mean, it seems to me that they're asking to provide protection for somebody prior to them belonging to their organization or their group. I'm confused as to whether you're trying to help the district and recruit, retain, or you want to help us place them on the salary schedule. So there's a little confusion here too, but what I'm hearing is you want to represent these people before they even belong to the NEA.
Well, we've had people who have worked in the district and have worked for the district through the alternative pathways, who haven't stayed for very long.
And once they're hired and they're onboarded and they're trained and they join the NEA, you can represent them.
In the past, we've had a few people on the alternative pathways that have been members of NEA. Would I say that's a large number? No, but we don't really say, well, only 50 people are members of a certain subgroup, so we're not gonna really pay attention to them, as opposed to 500. At the same time, because we have been a part of this process with the alternative pathways and those certain individuals, that's how this came to our attention.
And recruiting.
We just didn't come up with this out of thin air, just to have something to talk about. That's the reason for where we are today, is because this had been an issue in the past. I don't remember the particulars of the situation that I brought up, was because I wasn't the president at the time, someone else was. And I heard most of this conversation in passing. Now that's to my fault for not following through with that, to then be more prepared for today. And for whatever reason, that didn't cross my mind to inquire into that. So I apologize on that. But I hear what you're saying, Gary, and I think you make a good point. But it isn't that we're just didn't have someone that was a member that we went down this path. And as an association, NEA National has said, we'll represent those that went the traditional way as well as the alternative way. Either way, if they choose to be a member, they're welcome to join.
I recall some of those conversations and people that came to talk to us that were on that pathway. I am a graduate of transition teaching. I came in as teaching at the second career. This is my 6th year of teaching. I recall though, during the conversations, I don't remember the specifics, I do remember that there was some differences between the pay scale, like how I was treated versus the person that came and spoke to us. And I think it was specific to certain certification hours, college hours that were not being counted into the pay scale, or trying to move the pay scale. Whereas for me, it was not a big deal. I came in with a master's degree, graduated from Fort Hayes, with the transition teaching. I earned 30 plus hours. I moved up to the NA plus 30 hours. But there was an issue with a certain type of certification that this individual was not allowed to use hours for their upgrading their salary scale. We were planning to go revisit some of that. I remember saying, well, how come I wasn't treated that way? I was getting credit for my master's degree and for completion of my transition to teaching training.
Yeah, Richard, I know that you pay very close attention to anything that Gary Minke says.
It's like Charles Schwab.
And Gary has a saying that it sounds like what we have here is a solution in search of a problem. Would you say that quite a bit, Gary?
I find myself saying that oftentimes.
That's your famous last words, huh, Gary? Would you put that on your headstone? Gary Minke.
And, in all seriousness, to me, it kind of sounds like that with this proposal. When we talk about what could happen in the future, I guess what my encouragement would be that if we have a future issue, that is when we should address it, if it needs to be addressed. When we talk about alternative pathway instructors, how many do we have on a yearly basis?
That is a number that we don't know the answer to.
2 in my building. In the last 5 years.
Does the district have a number that they keep track of for that in bookkeeping?
Yes.
What is that number in percentage comparison to traditional?
Well, that's what I was asking. I mean, this is an NEAT proposal. So I would assume that you would have some idea of what the magnitude of the issue is. That's why I was asking. You know, I'll share that with you. In 3 years, we've had 29. Okay. Just under 10 a year is what we've averaged in the past 3 years.
And while that number is important, very important, what we get, of course, from our side is not the number of teachers who are alternative pathways. We have teachers who are instructors who got there through the alternative pathway, who then come to us. So we're dealing with the individual, not with the total number. So out of that total number, I would say we could probably give anecdotal stories on less than 5. But when those individuals come to NEAT with concerns about where they are on the salary schedule, then it becomes an issue that we have to deal with, especially if they're all members. I do have, like Gary's idea, I didn't think of it as a recruiting tool, but there we go. But that aside, we don't necessarily deal with numbers, we deal with individuals.
You wanna be a recruiter, Gary? We give you a little
No,
kickback
but
for
honestly,
that.
to me, some of it sounds like a little buyer's remorse, right? I'm a finance economics guy, I'm wore out with the budget, and you know what I mean, I'm just tired. I'll just be a lot easier to go teach math. And then I get in the math classroom and realize, right, the person that went through Fort Hays State did all the things they did to become an educator is getting paid a little more. Well, you know what? You were a banker. You couldn't negotiate prior to getting your job. You know what I mean? You accepted the position. Nobody had a gun to your head or a piece of chalk or whatever we do to hire people at a school district. I don't know. I'm not clear at the other end of the building, but it sounds like a little buyer's remorse. You know what I mean? From my standpoint. And I think we're all in agreement that, right, we're going to have to migrate people from other careers into teaching to keep it robust. I mean, I'm hearing that. With the rate of unemployment, that might not be the problem. It has been the last 5 years. We may have folks that are much more attracted to our jobs.
You know, one thing that I want to make clear, you know, we are always open and we welcome the idea of working collaboratively when it comes to addressing issues. We just have a struggle with understanding that this is an issue. We cannot see that there have been problems associated with placement of those who come to us through the alternative pathway. If it becomes one, you know, we talk about, you know, getting more from that load of recruitment in the future. We hope we do. And if we do, and it becomes, if there's a problem or a question as far as whether or not they are being treated fairly when it comes to placement, you know, we're certainly willing to discuss that. But a committee And we have committees galore right now. And to create a committee that, what was this, what did it say?
Committee of 10, 5.
Yeah, but it says that the committee was formed to create the language. Okay. Why create language where language may not be needed?
I think our attempt was, in regards to that statement, is at the end of the life of the committee, maybe that's what the decision, that's the decision that's been made, is that there is no reason to write language. Maybe at the end of the committee, we decide as a committee, let's write some language together, or we can decide not to. Because to me, the idea of a committee in this setting is very non-threatening. Because at the end of the committee is a year from now, or 6 months from now, whatever, to then say, we choose not to, collectively, we decided not to do anything in regards to writing language. So we went, as a team, as a committee, we went the angle to say, let's form a committee, because that would be as non-threatening to you, or as opposed to me, in doing so.
And we're just looking at the fact that, if we spend that time, that 6 months, that 9 months, whatever the case may be, that is precious time that could be used in a more beneficial manner than addressing, again, a solution in search of a problem.
Leave it to Gary.
If I could just add, I think what we were looking at was if we see more of these candidates following the alternative pathways, and instead of being reactive, being proactive, and having some kind of language for them that they could follow instead of, hey, wait a minute, and doing it on an individual basis. Because as we were looking at it, we did have a couple that talked to us, and we thought, okay, we're gonna get more of these people. Let's be proactive instead of reactive. I think that was the thought process.
If I might, I'll make a 10-minute caucus with my team, and we will make it short and quick and be back in just a few minutes to discuss this particular issue. Step outside a little bit.
As well.
That is verbatim, Lori, 4460. It is verbatim, That's recycle, that's not trash. I'm not holding the door. You might be dead.
You're full of it.
Oh, yes, but I can turn it on purpose.
Always is a very big word, and I tell my kids not to use those big words unless they're really sure.
I think we really need, if we've got
Still like-
alternative pathways, people who feel like they're not getting adequate representation, we need a narrative from them.
And
Yes. I should.
I figured. Oh, I said that.
We need teachers.
Oh, well, so I told her, since.
Just smearing water around the table, okay.
And the nice thing to see is you is dress up for but you can expect them, and it's not lost because that's the part of the country that you're in. So they've got their hand sanitizer sitting out, and I, it should have come with salt and wet wine. It was just like you were healing your hands. We couldn't believe it.
Okay. Let's give a second for Jeff to come back. I promised I'd keep it short. I did.
You did.
Not wasting anybody's time. Time is too valuable.
She's on her way.
Okay, as a team, we are going to go ahead and withdraw this proposal. We have several examples of anecdotal evidence, but we have nothing hard enough to actually bring to this table. So we will work on gathering that information in the next year, and you may see it again, but we are going to withdraw it this time.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you for the discussion. I think we had a good discussion over, well, we won't carry them, so.
Like
That's a Friday afternoon win.
I promise you, I haven't blinked. It's only 12 degrees in this room. I don't know how you do it.
It feels great, Gary.
I know.
Yes, it does.
If you notice, we switched, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I was right under the other day. I couldn't stand it.
Oh, that's where I
I'm
get to
with
sit.
you,
Matt, are you dying over there
Gary.
too? It's freezing.
I think that's the last proposal that we had to address.
That was the last non-economic proposal that we were addressing, yes. And so you had mentioned earlier, LR, that we would probably close out at this point in time. Okay, and for my team's purposes, LR and I did have a conversation. Next week, his team is super busy with a variety of different things that are on their plate for the next week. So it's clear we'll need to talk again to discuss economic issues, but at this point in time, they will need to take a hiatus from this meeting for at least the next week. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
What,
And what I'll do is contact you sometime within that week, so that we can go ahead and schedule to get back together that following.
Okay.
would it, as we did with non-monetary issues, we made an exchange prior to coming to the table. I'm assuming we would want to do the same thing for monetary.
Not exactly, and when I say not exactly, we won't have anything that we would be passing to you, but it would be very helpful to us if you could pass at least what it is that you're looking at in terms of, addendum and supplement.
Okay, so when maybe the first of next week, I could give you a call and we can make that arrangement.
Yeah.
I can get you, listen to, and when she's, I don't know when she's available, and we can, or you for that matter, we can make something Monday or Tuesday.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good weekend.
There you
All
go.
right.
Hopefully it won't rain.
Keep your mask up.
I hear you there.
Take off.
That's right.
So I think we got some training kind of in the works,
Yes, thank you.
Sarah, so,
I appreciate that.
yeah.
So she reached out to campus leaders for the cameras.
Or you want me to help you out? It's a button on the top. Yeah, hold that in and then it goes off.
Thank you.
Sure.
I did.
Okay.
I got